Hey everyone, Complex back with another video, and today we're gonna chat about Mortal Shell. It is a game that has recently launched on both PC as well as consoles, and it is a Dark Souls style game. The game is a whole heck of a lot of fun, and I for one am not normally somebody that plays Dark Souls style games, but I was lucky enough to get my hand on a copy of Mortal Shell, and I cannot even begin to tell you how much fun I've been having in this game. Now, I wanted to share with you some tips and tricks for new players to the game. Now, these tips and tricks are going to apply both to people that are brand new to just Mortal Shell as well as new to the genre overall. So if you're somebody that has played a Dark Souls style game in the past, some of these tips might seem a little obvious, but they are intended for people that just might be new to it overall, like I was when I first started playing. So let's just dive on into it. And for our first tip, I've got probably the most important thing that you will ever learn about Mortal Shell. There's a cat, and you can walk up and pet the cat. Legitimately, like, cemented this game as one of the greatest games of 2020. There is a merchant named Vlas that you will find very early on in the game, and next to Vlas there is a cat that you can walk up to and pet, and you can say hi to them as many times as you want. So make sure that you do that at least once in your time in Mortal Shell. Now, next up, if you go to edit options, whether it's to adjust your key bindings or anything like that visually, it doesn't actually pause the game if you are in the game itself. So if you're on the main menu, this won't matter. But if you're actually in the game, it doesn't pause the game. So if you're surrounded by enemies and you go to, let's say, adjust a key binding, enemies will still potentially attack you and you can still die from that. So just make sure you know that, and you're only working on whatever you need to do within the options section when you're in somewhere safe so you don't accidentally die. As one of the cooler parts of this game, you do actually have different shells that you can inhabit. Now, with that, though, comes a really cool mechanic when it comes to dying. So if you get a mortal blow in the game and you're supposed to have died, you actually will pop out of your shell, and you have until you die in your natural form to try to reclaim it. Now, when you do pop out of your shell, you have a teeny tiny bit of health. So it's pretty much, if they kill you, they kill you. Like, it's one hit, you're dead. But you do have a chance to go ahead and reclaim your shell, and that will actually give you full health and everything like that, so you can keep fighting. It is a last chance mechanic, though, so if you die after you reclaim your shell in a fight, you're dead. That's it. It doesn't even matter how long it's been. It is a last chance mechanic, and that is something to be aware of. There are particular upgrades for certain shells as you're going that after you kill enough foes will reset that mechanic, but especially early on in the game, it is something to bear in mind. Now, another tip for you is that the game does remember what you've picked up and what you've used. So if you're running around and you've looted some of the smaller enemy camps that are around the area, you don't need to worry about going back and getting some of the stuff that will actually go into your inventory. If it's something that is reusable, that will respawn, such as the different healing like mushrooms, stuff like that, those will respawn over time, and they actually have a little circle over them so you can actually see how much longer until they respawn in. But if it's something like for crafting or anything like that, those don't necessarily respawn. They're just in your inventory, and you don't have to worry about going back and re-looting. However, like I said, it does remember when you use something. So if you use all of those healing mushrooms, let's say, in a fight, you die, you don't come back to life with them again. So just bear that in mind when you're going ahead and using all of your stuff. Now, another really cool mechanic in Mortal Shell is something called Sense Instinct. There are different places that you can interact with throughout the game that will show you almost where you need to go. So it'll almost give you like a premonition, or you're sensing an instinct, if you will, for where you need to go to help progress the story. So if you're kind of lost and you don't know what to do next, definitely make sure you check some of those out. And the really nice part is you can go ahead and interact with those as many times as you'd like. So some areas have a couple of them, especially the starting tower. It has, I believe, like 3 for the story, and then a few others downstairs. So it is handy to be able to go back and relook at them as you're progressing. Now, this next tip is also one of literally the most important ones. There are like bear traps everywhere, especially in the starting area. I can't even begin to tell you how many times in my first few hours I stepped in a bear trap, and it keeps you trapped there for a little bit, and you do lose a little bit of health. And if an enemy creeps up on you, they can definitely do some damage while you're stuck in it. So just bear that in mind. You can actually, though, try to trick enemies into stepping in it. If you kind of like step in front of it, let the enemy kind of toddle to you, you can get them stuck in the bear trap, which is a really cool way to defeat them. But just bear that in mind. Watch where you're stepping, because bear traps are no joke in this game. Speaking of no joke, there are loots. I'm not joking. There are loots that you can pick up. I found two. There's a simple and then there is a more ornate one, and they, I believe, have two different songs to them. You can pick them up and then kind of put them in your quick bar and play them whenever you'd like. It's really cool. I'm obsessed with it. I do it all the time. The even cooler thing is that enemies in the world will also have loots that you can hear them playing, and it's not only a cool way to have just music and ambiance in the game, it's another good way to know where the enemies are, especially when you're kind of walking around an area for the first time. So tar is king in this game. Tar is your currency. It's what you can use to trade with Vlas for different things. It is also what you will use to eventually level up your shell, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But make sure that you are collecting as much tar as possible. Tar you can get from killing enemies, and sometimes you can get a consumable in the world that will just give you tar itself. But the most important thing to know is if you die, you lose all of your tar. Like that's what happens. You respawn and your tar is gone. You can go ahead and reclaim that, and I'll talk about that whole mechanic in just a minute. But if you're walking around with a boatload of tar on you, you might want to consider going ahead and leveling up whatever shells you have to, so you don't accidentally lose it all in an area that it might almost be impossible to get back to in the future. Now let's talk about leveling up your shells. Each of your shells have their own set of perks, and once you unlock the shell with Sestra, so you get the shell name and stuff like that, and you learn a little bit about who they were, you can then go ahead and get yourself different perks. And as you actually get yourself different perks for your shell, you will learn a little bit more about them and their backstory, which I really have enjoyed. The one thing to note, though, is that, like I said, tar is something that you will lose if you die in the game and you don't go back and reclaim your shell, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So you want to make sure, if you are holding on to a lot of tar, that you're going ahead and upgrading the different shells that you need to. Now, the other thing is most of these upgrades are going to cost you not only tar, but also glimpses. Glimpses are unique to each of the shells. So if you have 2 glimpses on one shell and then 4 on another, they're not combined. You're not going to see that glimpse move between shells, but you will see the tar move between shells. So just make sure that you are also consuming the different consumables to give you glimpses on the shells that are going to need the glimpses, so you're not accidentally claiming a whole bunch on a shell that you have no intentions of leveling up or putting any perks into. Now, let's talk about the hardening mechanic within the game. It is something that I find to be a boatload of fun. I think it adds an interesting element to the combat. Now, what happens is when you activate this ability, it creates a hardened shell around you, and it protects you from damage. Now, once you take enough physical damage, it does break the shell, or if you let go of the ability. So the main thing that you need to know about this is that you hold to press and you keep holding it as long as you want the ability active. And then when you're done with the ability, let go of the button and it disperses the hardening mechanic. Now, the other nice thing is that you can use this pretty much at any point in combat. You can even use it mid-swing, mid-dodge roll, anything like that, and it creates a lot of interesting moments and a lot of interesting ways to keep yourself alive, especially because this game doesn't have a traditional blocking mechanic. So make sure that you get comfortable with the hardening mechanic as early as possible. Now, a super important thing to note about this game as well, how to change out your shell. That's right, each of the shells have their own unique upgrades to them. They also have their own unique stats. They even dodge and strafe a little differently from each other. So you have 2 different ways that you can swap between them. One is in the tower at the start of the game. You can go ahead and swap them out at any point there. And when you do regain full health, which is really nice. So you start them kind of like fresh. However, you can also find effigies either out in the world or purchase them from vendors, and those are consumable one-time use, and they will instantly trade out your shell for you. Now, if you have very, very, very low health and you use one of the effigies to swap out shells, your health is going to stay the same. So also make sure you make note of that. If you're trying to swap out, let's say in the middle of a fight, it's not necessarily going to give you full health. Now, my last tip is going to talk about the reclaiming of your shell and your tar going forward. So we had talked about earlier on the different dying mechanics in the game, how you can die either through the last chance mechanic while still in your shell, or you can actually die outside of your shell in your natural form. If you die in your natural form and you go back to the spot where you died, you'll notice a little flame on the ground. If you interact with that flame, that will give you all of the tar that you had back, but that's it. You don't get anything else. Now, if you die through the second chance mechanic and you die while still in your shell, you'll notice that instead of the little red flame that you get in your natural form, there's actually a almost ghosted kind of highlighted version of your shell in the spot where you died. Now, the cool thing about this form is that you not only get all of your tar back, but when you consume it, you also gain health. So if you're in a particularly tricky area, you're in the middle of a boss fight, something like that, it might be worth it to wait to consume that shell until you need the health. So then that way you aren't wasting your different consumables in order to give you health. This is just another way to keep you going in the game. But y'all, that is going to be it for me today. Those are my top tips if you are a newer player to both Immortal Shell as well as the genre. Hopefully you are having a whole heck of a lot of fun playing the game. I know I am. It's so far been a serious addiction for me, and I just cannot wait to go back and keep playing, which is exactly what I'm going to do once I end this video. So I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your night and or day, depending on where you are in the world, and I will catch you next time. Bye, guys.